Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening I bid to all the teachers, the viewers out there. First and foremost, welcome to the webinar session for today. And I am Cikgu Ainu Zahara, and I will be hosting the webinar for today. All right, so just like everyone else, I'm sure that we are excited to actually meet, to listen to our speaker for today. And as you and I aware that the webinar title speak for itself, Be Inspired Session with Cikgu Samuel saya, right? Cikgu Samuel, how are you, Cikgu Samuel?
Hello, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
Hi, Cikgu Samuel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Loud and clear.
Yeah.
And thank you for agreeing to be with us in this webinar for today. We are really excited to be here for today. And how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm excited to be here as well. I would like to thank the organizers, SMK Tun Fatimah and PPD Pasir Gudang for actually inviting me today. I look forward to not just inspire you, but be inspired by you as well from everyone here today. And I hope this is a mutual learning process for all of us.
Yes, indeed, and I think that I speak for all the viewers out there that we cannot wait to actually listen to your your session, your experience, and your thoughts and opinions and all. And Cikgu Sam, before we move on, that I think that I need to set few reminders for the viewers first. Then I get back to you. All right. Okay.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So thank you, Cikgu Sam, for that. And viewers, Cikgu Sam will continue with the session in no time. Okay, in no time, so don't worry about that. All right, now this webinar session is organized by SMK Tun Fatimah Hashim with encouragement from our dear principal, Cikgu S. Mugunan Anak Lelaki Chandu. And this webinar is in collaboration with the PPD Pasir Gudang. Now, before we kick start with the session with Cikgu Sam for today, I have a few gentle reminders for the viewers. Okay, for optimum viewing of this webinar session, viewers are advised to have a stable internet connection. You also ought to use headphones for a better audio experience. Okay, and also viewers, you are welcome to post questions in the comment section in the YouTube. All right, because we are going to have a live Q&A session for the last 10 minutes before the webinar ends, right? Okay, and as for our viewers, especially the teachers out there, you can actually earn your professional development credit in the SPL KPM. Now, how are you going to do that? To be eligible for the credit in the SPL KPM, right, the first thing that you need to do is simply first watch the live webinar to the end, right, till the end, and then you can go to the link of for the SPL KPM. Now, the link will be given in the chat box later, okay, 10 minutes before the session ends. All right, so we are going to give you the link. Don't worry about that. So once you got through the link, that you may fill in your IC number as usual, right? Okay. Now, I'm going to introduce you the segments that we are going to do. So we have two segments here. So the first segment that we will have Cikgu Sam share his experience on working with the Orang Asli community, and as well as what he had done with his student inside and outside the classroom practice. And for the second segment, it's a bit interesting. Cikgu Sam will answer burning questions from the teaching community. Now, the questions, we gathered the questions beforehand, that we already distributed the Google form online, and some of the teachers already posted the questions, so we have already gathered that. So for this segment, I would say watch out for it, because who knows that your question might be the one that we pick. Okay. Now, as you can see there, those are the main achievements that Cikgu Sam has won, and it's the prestigious awards nationally and internationally. And over time, Cikgu Sam has captured the attention by being the top 10 finalists for the Global Teacher Prize Award in partnership with UNESCO 2020. Now, I think through this recognition, Cikgu Sam has actually opened the eyes of the public in regard with education for the orang asli community, and he served as an English teacher in SK Runcang in Pahang. Now, one of the objectives for this webinar is actually to listen to his experience and ideas, as it is hoped that from this session we will get inspired, and also this can be part of our professional development. Now, Cikgu Sam is currently pursuing his Master in Education Policy, State University New York, under the scholarship of Fulbright program. Okay, now without any more ado, please, I would like to welcome Cikgu Samuel Asaya, right, to take on the stage. Cikgu Sam.
All right, thank you, Aino. Give me a minute. I'm just going to look at my slides. Yeah, there we go. All right, thank you, Aino, for the elaborate introduction. First of all, again, I would like to thank everyone for being here with me today. And it's indeed an honor. It's always an honor to share my experience, to share what I've done, and to share my passion and my love for what I've been doing for the past 10 years. This session will not be possible without the organizing committee of PPD Pasir Gudang and SMK Tun Fatimah, and I would like to share my greatest appreciation to them for actually arranging this session. Now, when I was invited for this session, I was thinking, what do I share? Because there are a few types of webinars or workshops, or when I speak at seminars or when I give keynote speeches, there's always a different kind of focus. When I was speaking to the organizers, they wanted me to come up with something that was, something that teachers could take back, listeners could take back and reflect on their own practice. So I decided that, if for me to go through each and everything that I did for the past 10 years is going to be a bit impossible because there's just way too many. For example, if I were to give you one program that I did, and I were to explain the details of that program alone, it'll probably take 2 hours just for that alone. And accumulation of all that in the past 10 years is just going to take like probably a week. So we do not have that time. So I decided to reflect on my practice and what I've been doing, not just as a teacher, but not just a teacher in the classroom, not just someone who teaches English, but someone who actively wants to innovate, actively wants to connect with the community, actively wants to improve myself, to learn from the research, to learn from evidence. And as a person who is currently doing my master's in educational policy, whereby my concentration it's in global and comparative education. So what I do currently is, well, generally speaking, what I do is I compare a lot of policies from across different countries internationally. I have a specific interest in systems thinking, improvement science, also indigenous education as well. So I'm on a journey of discovery, and I think with that in mind, where you, if you always have this in your heart and in your mind that you always need to improve, that's a lot of things that you can do for your kids and for your job. So the topic of my sharing today, it's called not in isolation. What it means and what it implies is that it doesn't work alone. It doesn't. Nothing works because there's just one program. So what I would say is this theme of not having it in isolation, not doing one particular thing in solitude is a theme that is going to keep on. It will keep on repeating itself throughout my presentation today. All right, let's go to the next slide. So in our practice, ladies and gentlemen, it is crucial to comprehend, all right, that things do not work as directly as we want them to be. So for my introduction today, I'm going to introduce you to something called a systems approach and how we can apply that in our classrooms, in our schools, in our everyday practice. Like I said earlier, it is crucial to understand that things do not work as directly as we want them to be. If we have a very linear ideology of what education is, for example, if we think that if I do A plus B, it is going to equal to C. Unfortunately, that does not really work because schools are not factories. Schools does not work on a very rigid, fixed system. Every child is different. Every teacher is different. Every leader is different. Different kids got different socio-economic background. So it has to be very contextualized. Therefore, we must understand, we must really understand, before I start, we must understand that there is no one solution. Okay, there is no one direct answer for everything. I wish I could give you a book which says 10 steps or 2 steps or 10 ways to make sure your kids get A's in exam. But there are books like that available, but the success is not guaranteed. There are so many other factors involved. There are perhaps multiple factors involved, all interacting in various different ways, causing different effects that sometimes we can't keep track ourselves. So I'm going to introduce you to something called a system approach. And in slide 3, we can see that there's a difference between systems thinking and traditional thinking. When I started teaching back in 2012, I had a very different ideology of what education is, because from how I grew up, completing primary school and then going to secondary school, doing my PMR, then doing my SPM, eventually going into college. Those were natural progressions. Those were natural progressions of education that I was used to. I never thought that things could happen differently. I have to thank my parents for that. I had to thank people around me for that, so that everything was very linear. But when we look at problems, it is usually very complicated, all right? And when we are only applying a traditional way of thinking, our inference often leads us to view that one issue has one solution or one issue has one cause. Let me give you a classroom example. As an English language teacher, a lot of you might agree with me when you say that your students don't have enough vocabulary. They are weak in vocabulary. They do not have enough vocabulary to answer the exams or whatever that is. So what I'm going to do is, my solution is, I'm going to give them 3 words a day, or I'm going to come up with an English week. Now, as logical as that solution might sound, and as feasible as the idea may be, we are not putting that matter into perspective. What is the perspective? What is the reason behind our students not having that particular vocabulary, those vocabularies that they have? We are not defining the problem based on evidence. We are not defining the problem based on observations of how our students make meaning of learning that's happening in the classroom. We are not observing how they negotiate understanding. We are not even looking at ourselves. We are not reflecting on our practices. We often do things that we did last month, last year, 10 years ago. We come up with a fixed system of what we do every day in the classroom. And we also don't reflect on the classroom culture. So we assume that this particular measure will solve this problem. And usually we take it from best practices presentations. For example, Mr. Sam is doing this particular program, one particular program for his kids. And we're going to take this particular program and we're just going to do it with our kids. And then we find out it doesn't work. And then who do we blame? We blame the kids. So it is a continuous cycle of blaming one another. We will blame our kids. We'll blame the teachers that were before. Secondary school teachers will blame primary school teachers. Primary school teachers will blame preschool teachers. So it's a cycle of blaming altogether. But the root of this problem is we did not define that problem. And that is the essence of systems thinking. Okay, we do not assume that this particular problem will solve anything. So system thinking encourages you to map out what are the issues that your students are facing. What contributes to this? Eventually, what contributes to them not having enough vocabulary in the classroom? What contributes to their lack of motivation in their classroom? So I started doing this back in 2012. I didn't know it was called systems thinking. I learned this very much later. But I often see that I was often seeing that whatever that happens in my classroom is not direct. Because if I'm looking at my students, for example, it's so complicated. The orang asli community, their problems is just so complicated. I'm going to tell you about that later. All right. Now, in the next slide, I'm showing you a few types of systems mapping. I think this is something that I would like to start off with, of which later you can go and Google by yourself, understand what improvement science is, understand what systems mapping is, how you actually develop your ideas. And all these methods, these four methods that I'm showing you right now, there are multiple examples of it online already. So you can go and have a look, figure out what it works. But fundamentally, the principles are this. It is encouraging you to map out, what you are doing with your students, to map out what you're doing with your school, to map out what you're doing with your community. Now, how are you going to map this out? Most of the time, it requires collaboration. You can collaborate with your students, you can collaborate with your leaders, you can collaborate with other teachers in your school or other teachers in other areas as well. Map out what happens in your classroom, in the subject that you're taking. This is very, very, very important. I'm not specifically talking about the lesson plan, or I'm not specifically talking about your yearly plan. I think the lesson plan and the yearly plan, they have their purpose, but they are not the only ways where you can actually map out what happens with your kids in the classroom. A lot of times, I think I've seen teachers just using a yearly plan that is taken from somewhere else, from another school perhaps, or somebody that put it online, but they don't take time to adapt it into the needs of your students. And at the end of the day, you'll find out that your lesson plans don't make sense at all. For example, if I don't map out using a systems thinking perspective of what my kids are going through, I will ignore the fact that a lot of my students, my orang asli kids, probably did not have preschool. I would ignore the fact that a lot of my kids probably did not do really well in their year three, and have very limited vocabulary, limited understanding, very, very limited, extremely limited understanding of the English language in the year four. And I will quote unquote shock sendiri when I come up with lesson plans that is suited for somebody else. So back to what I'm trying to show you here is you need to map out what goes on in your classroom. Start thinking from a systems perspective. Start connecting the dots of what happens. And how do you do this? Observe. You need to reflect. You need to look at different types of evidence that's in your classroom. Okay? Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show how extreme, how complex this whole mapping can happen. In the almost 10 years that I taught in my school, I've taken this whole systems thinking development into a different level, observing the constructs, observing the relationship beyond just the four walls of my classroom. What you're seeing here's an example of what I've mapped out. It's actually way more complicated than this. But let's just say this is a scaled down version. If you can zoom in and you can see there's multiple factors that affect the learning of my kids in the classroom. So I support these relationships, these constructs, these links with one another, with data from research, with international reports and findings, and I enforce them. This is very important. I enforce these observations through my anecdotes, through what I observe in the classroom, through my reflections in the classroom, and I bring it in. So I'm not going to teach you how to do this today because it just doesn't make sense. It's like a few years worth of work. But in the next slide, what I can show you is how can you, what is our focus today? Okay, here's an example of what we're going to look today. It's probably a small piece of the one I showed you in our previous slide. So this is going to be our focus today. And me coming up with this, let me see, 7 focus also went through a systems thinking perspective of how I see all these elements in this 7 colorful circles here react to one another, complement one another, affects one another. And this is very crucial. All right. So we are going to look at what you can do in your classroom, in your school, and even the community that you're teaching in. All right. But this is an example. These 7 areas of focus could be very different from where you're coming from what you're studying. So let's look at some of it. All right. So in our focus today, we'll be looking at how I took time to understand the problems. All right. How I made everyday meaningful lessons. How I transformed the learning environment for my students. How I fostered relationship with the children and with the community. How I develop effective assessment strategies, how active networking and collaboration works, and last but not least, how I bridge classroom expectations, classroom teaching and learning, and examination needs. So this is the relationship that I hope to share with you today, these 7 areas. All right, now let's look at the most important one, defining the problem. All right, connecting the school, connecting the classroom, and connecting the community. Why is it very important to define the problem? I don't know about you, but I've always, people have always said this to me. I always hear this line, don't come to me with the problems, come to me with the solutions. I just want to know the solutions. But then when I go back and think about it, it doesn't make any sense. If we don't clearly identify what problems that we have, if we don't clearly identify what's happening among our students in the classroom, if we don't clearly identify what our weaknesses are as a teacher, how can we come up with effective solutions? We're just going to have this cookie cutter mentality or the one size fits all solution. We're going to take something from Finland or Thailand or Singapore, and we're just going to hope that it's going to work in our school miraculously. So it is very crucial. The first step in whatever you do is you need to define the problem. All right. Now, how do we define the problem? Firstly, I've got 3 words for you. So these are important 3 words for you before you define the problem, how you want to define the problem. Okay. 3 words. These are 3 magic words. Listen, listen, and listen. You need to start listening. All right. You need to make an active attempt to make your most important stakeholder, which is the students, especially the students, an active part of the process, an active part of the decision-making process. You need to start listening to the needs of your students. You need to start listening to the wants of your students. You need to start listening to what they do. And how do you listen? Listen is not just, okay, I'm just going to listen to you. No, you observe, you reflect, you write it down, you take notes, you come up with charts. And in addition, you need to support them with evidence from the literature. I've been a CFR master trainer for about, I think, a national master trainer for 6 years now, since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of times, whatever that we want to do in the classroom is not new anymore. Everything is available out there. You can look at second language teaching practices. If you're a math teacher, there's different techniques that you can do. If you're a science teacher, there are multiple. There is nothing. There is basically nothing much that is new anymore. It's not about reinventing the wheel, if I can put it that way. So what you can do is support your classroom decisions with evidence of what is already available out there. It's been tried, it's been tested. What you need to do is you need to adapt it to the needs of your students. But most importantly, how do you adapt? You need to start listening first. Okay, so let's look at the challenges that I saw in my community. It is based on my observations, it is based on me listening, it is based on the research. So these are the challenges in my school, in my community. All right. So for you, it could be very different. So after that work of going through that process of trying to identify and define the problem, these are my challenges. First of all, there's poverty, there's accessibility issues, there's facility issues, there's discrimination to the indigenous community itself, there's a language barrier, there's cultural inadaptability, there's very low school attendance, and there's very high dropout rates. Now, this is just the general themes of the challenges that my kids are facing. Let me just give you some example. For example, language. My kids predominantly speak the Jakun language. So if I'm teaching them English, English would be their third language as well. So how do I bridge that gap? Later, if you want to ask me a question about that, please go on. There's low school attendance rate, there's high dropout rate. So I realized, I started figuring out, why do my kids don't want to come to school? What can I do in the classroom to actually improve their attendance to schools? Why is there a very high dropout rate? Now, let's look at the next slide. Now, this is very important, all right? This is very important. Besides the 8 to 9 challenges that I actually highlighted in the previous slide, I found that my biggest challenge was not the lack of facilities, was not the lack of infrastructure. It was not because of the language barrier. It was not. But it was predominantly for me based on the process that I went through of observing, of looking at everything. The biggest challenge for me was the perception towards the capabilities of my Orang Asli students. No, that was the biggest challenge that I faced. It is recorded in the literature, it's recorded in research that these kids are assumed. Assume in Malay would be dianggap ataupun tanggapan, persepsi bahawa murid-murid ini tak ada motivasi untuk belajar, they are not confident, they are not independent, they are incapable, they are stupid, they are lazy.
Cikgu Sam,
Yes.
I think because of this perception that it makes the student also believe in the perception themselves, right?
Most definitely, and that is even worse actually. So
Yeah.
in time, the school's culture and the community's culture. In fact, I'm just going to share with you what happened with my kids. If this was back in 2012 to 2013, let's say if you want to bring them out for sports programs or whatever, one of the first questions they would be asking me about, Cikgu, kita lawan orang Melayu ke? Because their perception is this. It's not about racism or anything, but their perception is this, that we are not good enough. We are not strong enough. We are not smart enough. And this is a psychological thing that they have come to accept throughout the years. So this is a very big problem that I face. How do I overcome this? And not just from the matter, from the perspective of the students, but also from the perspective of the teachers, from the perspective of the expectations of the community. Because in Orang Asli schools, generally speaking, expectations were extremely low back then. I remember in 2012, 2013, 2014, if you want to be comfortable, if you want to be a very lazy teacher, it was easier to do it in an Orang Asli school because we do not have expectations. Sebab kalau budak fail tu, alah biasalah. Budak fail tu biasa, dia orang kan tak pandai. Dia orang kan ada poverty, dia orang kan tak biasa datang sekolah, dia orang kan tu. So the expectations were really, really low. But I refused to believe this. I refused to believe this, and I took this as a personal challenge. I took this as a very personal challenge because why? I started building a strong relationship with the students. It felt like somebody was telling me that my children or my students were stupid and they can't learn. And I started getting very angry. And I made it upon myself to say that, hey, with the process that we are doing, with what we are building together, I'm going to challenge all these perceptions. I'm going to challenge all these perceptions. Now, let's look at what happens in the classroom. Common situations in the Orang Asli classroom. Let's have a look at this. Now, if you're reading this, this is probably what you have seen as well in your school. This is probably what you're seeing as well in your classroom. And if you're being very honest with yourself, this is probably perhaps what you're doing as well. Drilling, chalk and talk. There's no specific plan for the students, no organized learning culture. But the most important one that I'm highlighting here is I realized that school and the concept of education and the purpose of education, not just English, was not meaningful to my kids. You see, when learning is something that you cannot comprehend, when learning and education is not something that you can make meaning of, lepas tu you tambah lagi dengan budaya kerja yang berteraskan ke arah peperiksaan, di mana kalau kita punya prinsip mengajar tu macam ni, our principle of education is this. Kalau saya pergi kelas, saya akan suruh budak buka buku, jawab soalan 1 sampai soalan 10, jawab, kita bincang, okay, that is learning. But for my students, that was not meaningful at all. And for a lot of children nowadays, that is not meaningful. They don't see a reason in what you're doing. And this goes back to what your principles of teaching and learning is. What are your principles of education, ladies and gentlemen? The host as well, and everybody who's listening to me right now. What are your principles of education? For me, education is something, or learning, the concept of learning, the concept of teaching. It must inspire creativity. It must inspire kids to solve problems. It must inspire them to communicate and collaborate with one another. It must inspire them to work together in projects. But if your principles and your vision of what education is completely different from that, it is something that, oh, learning is, kalau pergi kelas, saya akan bagi list dan saya akan suruh budak hafal, esok kita akan buat spelling, and then you're just missing the point of learning altogether already. Because the kids, they are not doing it because it's something meaningful to them, it's because it's forced onto them. And they will not understand why are we doing all this in the first place. All right? Now, let's go to the next point that I'm going to share with you about. Creating and testing prototypes. Now, I could have called this section, the previous section, we talked about defining the problems, what our principles are, and what we need to do through systems thinking to actually define your problems and link everything together. I could have labeled this section as Sam's secret magnificent formula or Sam's secret magnificent programs for your kids. But and I could give you a list of what works and what does not work. But who am I kidding? I'm just going to be very, very, very clear and very honest with all of you. The reason why I call this creating and testing prototypes is because in a lot of interventions that you do in your school, in a lot of teaching practices that you do with your kids, it is all about trying and failing, reflecting, and try it again. It is never about getting it right the first time. Even with all the projects that I've done throughout the 10 years that I was teaching, even through all the projects, even through all the methods, even through all the systems thinking, it is not a fixed formula. It's never a fixed formula. Because why? Every year I get very different kids altogether. Kids with different abilities, kids coming with different needs. This year the kids maybe pandai sikit membaca, next year terus tak boleh baca langsung. So what do I do? And that's why it is important to create prototypes, to test these prototypes, and to keep on improving on your ideas. And how we're going to do this? We're going to look at three main elements today, all right, under this section. The first one is about creating meaningful classroom lessons. This will be the three main strategies that I'd like to show you about. And remember, it is not fixed. It's something that you will need to experiment on your own and adapt to the needs of your students. Secondly, we're going to look at the different types of projects that I've actually done throughout the years. And lastly, the strategy that I'm going to show you about will be the modules that I did with my kids throughout the years. Okay, now, these are the different types of strategies that I do every day in my classroom. All right, so if you can see, there are eight different types of strategies. These are not new strategies. These are strategies that has been around for a long time. Even 21st century learning, even project-based learning, even flipped classroom, they have been around for a long time. And the idea here, what I'm trying to propose to you is this. You need to focus on the process. All right. It is not about the arrangements of the tables in your classroom. It's not about not using traffic lights or using traffic lights. It's not about doing this in a particular way or not. You need to first understand the process. All right. You need to first understand the process. So through these 8 strategies that I'm going to show you right now, it's role-playing, task-based, project-based learning, the 21st century learning of 4 C's, integration of technology using flipped classroom. What I'm going to focus to you mostly right now here is differentiation strategies. I think this is one of the most important or most crucial tool that every teacher can have. Differentiation strategies. There are 7, if I'm not mistaken. I have to go and check myself. There are 7 main ideas behind differentiation strategies. You need to differentiate your instructions. You need to differentiate the time. You can differentiate the task that you're giving to your students. But ladies and gentlemen, all these 8 measures must be based on the principles that I was talking to you about. You can differentiate your strategies, but if you're still very much module focused, if you're still very much answering question focused alone, I'm not saying modules are bad, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying answering questions and doing sums are bad, don't get me wrong. They are important, but they are not the only way. There are other ways that actually defines learning together with these modules and together with this answering question. Here are some of the examples that I will show you in the picture. So these are my kids working on projects together. They build stuff, they create stuff, they interview stuff, they come up with storytelling sessions with each other, they use technology, they write this, they do that. One of the things that we did all the time back then was doing flipped classroom. The concept of flipped classroom is you flip what happens. Usually kita mengajar dalam kelas and budak balik rumah dan dia buat latihan, betul? So basically flip classroom you terbalikkan. That's why it's called kaedah berbalik, if I'm not mistaken. So you terbalikkan the process dalam kelas, budak tu explore sendiri. Budak tu akan cari, explore cara nak buat sendiri. Kita provide all the bahan for them to do it, and then they go home, and then after that they do it themselves, and then they come back again and they teach each other. So this is the process that we've been doing. So if you want more examples of all these processes, I can give you in another session. We probably can explain how does SAM do project-based learning, or how does SAM actually integrate technology in the classroom. Or if you have any questions specifically to these 8 measures, you can leave it in the comment later, and I'm sure the host will pick it up and can ask it to me later. So I'm going to move on to programs that transform the learning experience. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm proposing to you is there are things that you need to do every day in the classroom, like the meaningful everyday lessons that I was showing you about just now. Those were the types of lessons that happen every day in my classroom when nobody is looking, when nobody is observing, when nobody's in my class coming to look at me. I'm still fervent in making sure my children learn through communicating with one another. When nobody is coming to assess me, I'm still focused on because I believe that my students will learn when they do projects with each other, and that must happen every day. If you don't want to do these programs, it's okay. If you don't want to compare the systems thinking or whatever nonsense that I've been telling you about, it's okay. You
Cikgu
need...
Sir,
Yes.
I'm interested when you say when no one is coming to assess me.
Right. Because unfortunately it becomes fake. It becomes not real. Unfortunately, when somebody comes to visit, when Mr. Mukadan comes to see you in the class, I'm just kidding. When somebody from the PPD comes and visits you, you put on a show. And for me, I can never do that. I feel, why do I need to fake what I'm doing? This is what I'm doing every day. And you need to have that belief that this... And like what I said just now, it's based on your prinsip. Apa prinsip-prinsip you terhadap pendidikan? Sebab kalau you percaya bahawa budak kalau dia bekerja antara mereka, kalau mereka berkomunikasi, mereka buat projek bersama-sama, itu yang menyebabkan mereka belajar, you akan buat automatik. You memang akan buat hari-hari. Tapi of course benda tu susah lah. It is tough. Whatever that I'm showing you is not easy, ladies and gentlemen. Doing this kind, you need to bond with the kids. You need to make sure they follow your instructions and all that. It is not easy, but it is essential, and it gets easier. Now, after 3 years of equipping my kids with everyday learning lessons, meaningful everyday learning lessons in the classroom, I realized that there came a point where that was not enough. In a few minutes ago, I showed you the challenges and the perceptions towards my kids and why it is very complex for my kids in the orang asli community. So I realized that apa yang saya buat dalam kelas itu sahaja tak cukup, sebab bila murid-murid saya balik rumah kepada keluarga mereka dan kepada community mereka, environment learning tu tak ada. There is no learning environment. So I realized I needed to do more. And that is when I started coming up with different programs to actually support what was happening in the classroom. For a lot of teachers, perhaps coming up, being an effective teacher in the classroom every day, doing meaningful lessons in the classroom every day should be good enough. But for my kids, it was not enough. I needed to do more. So these are the 6 main programs that I did throughout the years. We have the 21st Century English Classroom, we have the Asli EPAL program, we have the Originals, we have Speak Up with Poetry, Fun with Storytelling, again, and Sekolah Pokok. So what I would like to emphasize in the construction of my programs, if you're looking at the 21st Century Learning Classroom right now, it is, if you want to attempt to do programs like what I do, you need to understand that it needs a lot of networking and collaboration. And this is something that I've learned throughout the years. I started networking with a lot of people. I started collaborating with a lot of people. I started gathering funds. I started becoming very good at designing programs for my students, designing what I wanted to do with them. And if you're looking at the Asli EPAL program in 2016, when I did the 21st century English learning classroom, then we already had all the facilities in the classroom. This was back in 2015 and 2016. It was way before digital learning was a thing, especially in rural schools. So we started doing this. For the Asli EPAL, I had mentors for my kids who were like all over the world. They started writing to my kids. We exposed my kids to it exposed my kids to a lot of things, how international people lived, what are the different careers out there. At the same time, they started improving in their English as well. But the most important here is this: it's not so much of how good that program is, it's how I conducted the programs. The process behind conducting each program is very important, because I'm sure a lot of schools, individuals here, teachers here listening to me, memang biasa kita buat program intervensi dekat sekolah. Dia bukan benda satu benda yang baru. Tapi bagi saya 100% percaya kepada program intervensi yang saya buat tu. Saya spend time reflecting on the program intervensi. I trust the process. I trust the design of my intervention program. It is not just another program because somebody else is asking me to do a program. And remember when HIP, highly immersive program, started coming up, this was before that. I realized that I needed to do this for my kids. It needed to immerse my students in this kind of learning practices. So the process matters. It's not so much about how fancy it is on paper, but how you implement it. And this is basically the story of a lot of our programs in education. Looks great on paper, looks great on policy, but the implementations fall short. Why? Because you don't believe in the foundings, in how that policy or that program was actually founded. What constitutes that program? But again, if I'm going back to how I started this presentation, it has to go back to you defining the problem. And that is how you can adapt your program to the needs of your students. That is very important. So if you're following me from where I started about 20 minutes ago, this is the process that you must go through. Defining your problem always comes first. If you're looking at the next program that I did, it's called The Originals. This was in 2017. So I started teaching my kids to play the ukulele. I taught them in English. I had a question in the session that I did 2 days ago where they asked me, Mr. Sam, do you speak to your children in English all the time? The answer was yes and no. Yes and no. Why no? No, because a lot of times when my kids come to me, they don't have English. And I give them very simple instructions like, how are you? They got no answer. I even asked my kid, what was their name? I have this on video. Asked what's his name. He just could not respond to me at all. So at that level, it makes no sense for me to actually speak 100% English from the beginning. So what I do is I gradually design something. Again, systems thinking. I process it, I design it in a way that throughout in a year and a half or 2 years that I'm going to teach them, it must eventually lead to 100% of English. So in time, I do speak to them in English all the time. Because teachers, especially if you're teaching in a rural community where English is not their first, second, or third language, you must remember that the English environment that they need comes from you. And if you yourself don't provide that English environment, it does not make sense altogether. Because English is a language first. I always have this perception. I'm teaching them a language first. If I'm thrown to China for 6 months, I assure you, I'll be able to somehow speak that language because I have to. And with that perspective, that's what I was doing. So with The Originals, it was amazing. We started performing. We started doing performance. We started doing shows. I started teaching them in English. They started teaching each other in English, and it was great. We only sing English songs. So the whole ideology behind the Originals is something that I would love to share with you one day if I have the time. Now, this is another, if you're looking at fun with storytelling, this is another program that I collaborated with Multimedia University in Cyberjaya. It was a great initiative. We started using green screens in 2017 itself. The team actually came out with a great job. I think I collaborated with the faculty of I don't remember what faculty they said, but I have to go and check. But yeah, it was a great initiative. A lot of collaboration happened there. I did another program called Speak Up with Poetry, because I believe when you use poems is and rhymes, they are great tools to actually get students to pronounce words correctly, to get them to remember vocabulary and sentence patterns. And I did not do this alone. Like how I was saying before, we need to collaborate. So I got together with some of my friends. Yeah, in the picture there, one of them is my lecturer. I got them to come up with contextualized poems for my kids to suit the levels of my students, to suit the culture of my students as well. That's why I said you need to define the problem first. The problem was, if I remember 2018, I realized that a lot of the poems that I was teaching my students tak ada kena-mengena dengan kehidupan mereka. It was always talking about something that was in an urban area or in another country. And the language was a bit too hard for them. It had to be gradual. So I started doing this as well. And last but not least, the last program that I did was called Sekolah Pokok. It was in 2019. And this program, I actually started it at the end of 2018 as a trial run with a few children. We started doing something together because I want, the main reason why I was doing this was because school attendance in my class was great. The kids were coming to my class, they were loving my sessions, but unfortunately in other classes it was not working that much because so I thought, why don't I share the joy of learning? I share the engagement of learning with other students as well, and we're going to do it in the environment, mainly because the environment is a factor that is very close to my Orang Asli students. So I did lots of studying about what eco-learning is, what is multisensory learning, and what is environmental education. And I tried to incorporate all these different elements to what I was doing with my kids. And it required a lot of planning. And initially, it started off very small. If I'm not mistaken, it started off with about 10 kids only, but the numbers start growing magnificently. And I saw, and this is very important, that I saw that the kids were coming to my lessons in Sekolah Pokok because they wanted to come. Even if a lot of times I would say 50 to 60% of the kids that turned up were actually kids that I taught in school, but they wanted to come. They wanted to learn. They know that they can do something. They know that they can learn and explore their own capabilities. And that is a great success to me. But eventually, through the process, the numbers grew, the engagement grew. Kids started taking more and more responsibility. And a lot of times my kids who have trained for a year or year and a half, they started teaching other kids altogether. This was the process that happened. Now I'm going to show you some of the modules that I've done. There are 5 modules. There are more, but I don't have proper documentation because it's been gone for some time already. So, like I said, there's nothing special about this module. Let me just be very clear. There's nothing special about this module. But if you have been following what I've been doing, what I've been saying for the past 40 minutes or 30 minutes, it is part of the process. My modules cater to the types of teaching and learning that I was doing in the classroom. We look at the detour one, if you look at the first 8 UPSR module, these modules cater to the concept that I was presenting in my classroom. This is important because sometimes you're teaching in a very different way and you're doing assessment in a very different way, and the modules that you're giving them is a different module altogether. It doesn't suit the needs of my students. I remember very clearly in 2013 or 2014, I think I went for one of my first UPSR talks, and they were introducing a module, and they were saying, okay, this module was good. And when I was looking at the module, I realized that what I realized was the module was susah sangat tau. It came with a perception that budak saya dah semua pandai, semua jawab cara soalan, padahal dalam kelas saya ada budak yang tak pandai baca pun lagi. So I realized that this does not make sense at all. How am I supposed to bridge that gap? The easiest thing to do was, this is not my problem. Budak tak pandai baca tu bukan masalah saya. Itu masalah cikgu tahun lepas. But I decided, no, this is not supposed to be the way. So I tried doing everything together. And you can see that in these modules, if you're looking at the UPSR English exam guide, the orange book, they have exam elements in it. Some people have misquoted me a lot of times and they say SAM is all about engagement and enjoyment, but not about exam. That is nonsense. Exams are important. But the thing here is this: I am process focused. I am not product focused. It is the same with everything that happens in life. For example, I believe that if my teaching and learning is very effective in the classroom, if my students can actually collaborate with one another, if my students can speak confidently, if they can give feedback to one another, if they can do this in the classroom, eventually that will show in the exams. And the exams will be like a kayu pengukur sahaja. But the only thing a lot of people don't like to see is time. It takes time. And if you're looking at the effect module, for example, it's a few slides after this one. Effect module, for example, it shows that how the students, the process that I was doing in the classroom was reflected in the. Can we show the slides where there's the modules? Yeah, so yeah, this was the Ditto one. This is the first aid module. If you're looking at the first aid module, there were different colors to it. I was catering it to the different levels of my students. I applied lots of differentiation strategies in this module itself. For each task that I was doing with the kids, there was a keynote at the side there. Okay, for the weak kids, I must give them this amount of help. For the better kids, I need to challenge them more. So it was very specifically designed. And if you're looking at the English exam guide, that was also the same. If you're looking at the effect module, it's also the same as well. There was lots of communication involved. So my modules is not just about list of things to do, but it's about how are you going to use the module in the classroom? How are you going to adapt your teaching approaches that suits the needs of the module? Because a lot of times I get teachers asking me, Sam, can I have your modules? And I say, yes, no problem. But you need to sit with me and you need to understand with me what are the principles that came before that I created those modules. That is very important, because if you just take the module without the principles, it's not going to work. It's definitely not going to work. You can go buy the best books in the best bookstores in the world, but if your students can't read, if your students can't write, they don't have the important vocabulary, why are you teaching them exam answering skills? It doesn't make sense. But if they are already equipped, if the process is already good in the classroom, and then you add on the exam answering skills, it makes a lot of sense. It's a makes a gradual progression of things, all right? Now, let's go to the final part of this, the final piece of the puzzle. Being reflective and being evidence-based. So this is probably a trigger for a lot of people out there. What is evidence? What is evidence and why is it important to you? I forgot the why. Yeah. And what is assessment to you? Now, we are often focused on the what to do, what to give, what to write, but never about the why. And being reflective about yourself, about your practices, being reflective in your assessment is very important. And on top of that, you need to be evidence-based. Now, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now, if you can see here, these are the different types of assessments that I do in the classroom. We currently have Penceramah Bilik Darjah, am I right? Penceramah Bilik Darjah, PBD. Yes. So the assessments that I do is about the process. I'm process focused, not product focused. Eventually, I'll get to the products, but I'll focus on the project. So I look at what happened to the classroom. For example, dalam banyak-banyak program yang I tunjuk tadi tu, semua program tu, I'm kind of like an efficiency addict. I need to write down everything. I need the details for everything. I'm kind of OCD like that. So I have files, I have observations. My reflections in the classroom, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but if you think that reflections are only about 5 out of 10 students got it correct, you have totally misunderstood the purpose of a reflection altogether. My reflections are usually half a page, or sometimes I do it 2 days once, writing down extensively what's happening in the classroom. Who is getting it what right? What am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? What can I improve and what should I reduce? What should I increase? And this is important. And I do this for my exams. I do this for the projects that I do in the classroom. I do this for my everyday teaching and learning. And if we go to the next slide, let's look at some examples. Right, so these are criteria based. You see, they are names. And I do an outcome analysis of what happens in the classroom all the time. These are just examples. I think this class had about 25 to 30 kids. And I was doing outcome analysis for each and every one of them. My wife is a doctor, and always before and while a doctor is examining a patient, they must get the history. You need to know the history of the patient, and then you can give specific medication, a specific plan. And they usually have a chart right at the bed of your hospital, and that chart has every information on what he's doing in the classroom. That's what I attempted to do. So usually I'll set the objectives of what I want to achieve. I will analyze them, and I will record the students' progress. And I'm not only recording their marks, it is part of it, but most of it is how they perform in the classroom and how they respond to what I do. Can we go to the next slide, please? Scores as well, very important. But if your interpretation of evidence is merely just the scores, okay, fair enough. But what does the scores mean? You need to understand what it means. Why is your students not achieving these certain targets that you are setting? And it's not because, oh, sebab budak ni malas. That is a very lazy interpretation of what's going on. You need to understand what goes on in the classroom and how can you reflect on what you're doing as well. So I write it down. Sometimes if you can see in the picture on the right, it says group A is doing this, they need to maintain, increase target to a certain percent, they need to emphasize on the narrative. So I'm teaching them how to write narratives, what are the different aspects for the group C and D, what I need to do. So it is score-based as well. Next slide, please. Now, right, individual, it depends. I don't do individual case notes all the time, but kalau I ada budak yang critical, contoh budak yang tak boleh membaca, bila datang pada saya, I have to do this. Because for me, if I want to blame someone else, it's easy, but I feel that when the kids come to me, it is my responsibility to make sure that they can read, to make sure that they can write, to make sure they can answer the exams. Because as much as I don't like to say, I have to focus on it a lot also, because for my kids, exams are a ticket out of poverty. It gives them a better future. The government actually allocates a lot of funds for these kids to actually go to secondary school. But because they don't do well in the exams, it does not happen. So we go to the next slide, please. Yes, strategy. So this particular form of reflection, I do a lot with my programs, I do a lot with my courses. I write it down a lot. So what I'm trying to say here is this. You need to be active in reflecting on what you're doing. You need to know what's happening in your classroom. I teach usually, people might say that, Sam, you got a lot of time in the world. Unfortunately, that's not true. I'm even the data teacher in my school. I teach about 30 to 34 periods a week. I've never enjoyed that clause kan cikgu data dia ada 15 waktu kan. Never happened to me. And on top of that, a lot of these projects that I do are after school hours, so I stay back with the kids because I believe in the process and I trust the process. So being reflective and assessing the process, assessing for learning and not of learning is very important. When you are assessing for learning, you're looking at aspects of what you can improve. When you're assessing, you're assessing the normal way of saying, you're just looking to judge. I'm just going to judge these kids. Siapa yang pandai, siapa tak pandai, siapa yang bodoh, siapa yang tak bodoh. And then I'm going to judge you. That's not the purpose of what I'm doing. So if you're going to the next slide, this is what happens in my classroom. This is my classroom system, ladies and gentlemen. And this incorporates what I've been telling you for the past 50 minutes, I think. 40 to 50 minutes. This incorporates everything. Meaningful everyday learning strategies, transforming the English language environment, coming up with specific modules, detailed and reflective assessment strategies for learning, love, and creating a relationship of trust. Let's look at the words in red. It is important, that's why I put it in red. Number one, it requires continuous reflection and intensive planning. Number two, they do not work in isolation. And that is why I don't really like to share one piece of what I'm doing. Sam, can you share about your module? Yes, I can, but you're missing all the other 7 or 8 elements I'm going to share about because they don't work alone. They have to work in a system. They address different areas at the same time. And each element that I'm showing you in this wheel here crucially complements one another. Mereka mesti, they saling bergantung. And the success of what my children and I do is solely dependent on the principles, and I believe. So at the foundations of these 5 ways that I'm showing you is the principles. And if you attempt to do what I've been sharing with you, or whoever has been sharing with you for the past, whatever you have listened, if you don't have the same principles of what this teacher believes in what teaching and learning is, it's going to be a big waste of time. Because if you are implementing a different strategy and you are expecting a different result, it's contrasting expectations already. You ajar budak menari tapi you assess dia untuk berenang. It doesn't make sense altogether. It needs to be aligned. All right. So now let's reflect. I love reflecting. So let's reflect. That's in the next slide. What we did today and what I shared with you today, it's about connecting causal links and mapping them out through a systems thinking viewpoint. This is what I started my presentation with today. How everything works in connection with one another. How you need to start mapping out. It could be as small as one classroom, one group, or it could be as big as a school, as a community, as a PPD system, or whatever. You need to start mapping them out. And you need to start listening. You need to start engaging with multiple stakeholders. That is very important. Making them active in the decision-making process. All right? You also need to take time to define your problems. That is very important. It's in the previous slide, sorry. Take time to define your problems. Don't rush to solutions. But that does not mean if taking time means you're just going to relax, say, okay, let's wait next month or next week before we come up with something. No, be active when you're taking that time. Make sure that you define the problem as specific as you can to the needs of your students. That is very important. All right, next. You need to identify solutions by mapping them out first and then testing prototypes. See what works for your students. See what does not work for them, and this could be in your classroom practices. This could be in your programs that you're doing. This could be in your assessment techniques. This could be in your modules. You need to reflect, actively reflecting. And this process of reflecting does not really just happen at the end of the lesson or at the end of the week or at the start of the month. It is ongoing. You need to be very aware of it. How did Sam do it? I think, to be very honest with you, at the beginning, I'm not a very organized person. But for me, when I see that there's a need, there's a purpose of what I'm doing, I become very obsessed with it. And I know that there's a reason of what I'm doing this or this. I must spend my time to plan. I must spend my time to reflect. I must spend my time to, most importantly, understand. If someone comes to me and says, Sam, I want you to do this, if I don't understand, if I don't see the relation to how it's going to help my student, I will not going to do it. I will go and look for evidences. I'm going to go look for research. I'm going to look for data to support that, to see whether it works for my kids or not. And then I will reflect on it. And lastly, we need evidence-based practices. Very important. But what constitutes as evidence? If before this you're only seeing evidence as exam results, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. There are multiple different types of evidences as well. And last but not least, the call for autonomy and teacher empowerment. I think I'm very grateful that in my time in my school, though initially I received some setbacks from individuals around me. In my time, I've decided to, when I decided to prove people wrong, when I decided to come out of my bubble, I kept on challenging myself and I took the autonomy. But I hope that more teachers, leaders who are listening to this session today, trust your teachers. Empower them to come up with ideas of their own, because they are experts of their students. They see their students day in, day out. They know what students want and what students need. And we need to empower teachers. And to end my slideshow today, I'm just going to promote something. Don't just teach, but create relationships. This is what I'm going to promote to you. It is very important. It glues everything together. I have this saying, I always say this. I believe we need good pedagogy to teach. Very important. Data, methodology, very important. But most importantly, I believe in the pedagogy of the heart. It must be done out of love. And that's what makes teaching a very challenging job. It's very challenging because you need to be extremely efficient in what you're doing. And at the same time, you need to show a lot of heart. And in my last slide, I'm just going to promote an intervention that I'm doing right now. It's called Cikgu Kickstart. It's not an award, but it's actually funds. I've reflected in my time as a teacher what I was doing, and one of the biggest setback that I faced was bila nak buat projek tak ada duit, tak ada peruntukan. That's a big problem. And I realized I wanted to help teachers to do this as well. So what I did was started collaborating with Teach for Malaysia and Pemimpin JSL and a few other funders. And we decided that to help mitigate learning loss caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the best way that we can help our students is to help teachers. So if you have an idea, if you see a problem in your classroom right now, based on whatever system thinking that I taught you about, or how you can identify your problems in the classroom, in your school, and in your community, and you need money to conduct that program, go to this Facebook page. It's called edification.my. There's this poster, click on it. There's a few other information on it. Send in your application in 300 words. What we are going to do in this program is this. First, we're going to give you an opportunity to win money, up to 6,000 ringgit to the teacher. So the teacher gets full autonomy of what they want to do with it based on what they're pitching in this program. And on top of that, we're going to give you training. We have invited specialists and experts from the Ministry of Education. We are inviting specialists and experts from private sectors as well to teach you how to develop your ideas so that it's better implemented for your school, for your teachers, and for your community. And most importantly, we're going to provide you with a link to big-time funders or industry leaders. Sometimes when I was in school, I always wish if I knew somebody from Shell, for example, how I wish I can ask money from them. What we're going to do through this program is, instead of just giving you the money, instead of just giving you the training to develop your program, we are going to give you the opportunity to share your ideas with these top guns as well. So it's probably not just going to end with 6,000 ringgit. There's a very big chance they're going to give you more money to actually make it bigger. So if you want more information about it, go to that edification page. And with that, I'd like to wrap up my sharing today and my presentation today. And I'm going to hand over the session to Aino. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cikgu Sam. I must say that is very insightful sharing, that we've learned a lot of things from you there, and also a lot of ideas that I think that personally I would have a look at it and would adopt and adapt for my classroom practice. And I think in particular that I like is the idea of mapping your plans and your progress. And by doing this, that I would understand the first thing that we need to do first is to actually identify the problem, because if you don't identify the problem, then we won't be able to have like a good planning and the progress of coming out of this, right? Okay, so thank you for that, Cikgu Sam. Okay, now viewers, we have the second segment. So let's move on to our second segment. As I mentioned previously, that over this past week that we have collected questions from the teaching community. All right, so we have collected questions online that we have distributed the Google form, and there are some of the teachers that already asked us interesting questions. And teachers, thank you for the questions. So to make our session more engaging for you, that I need the viewers' help to pick the question number. Okay, so because we are turning this segment to virtual table topics. Now you are going to help me pick the questions. So don't worry, I'm going to explain this more. So based on the responses that we've got, all the questions that we've got, we have categorized this to 3 categories, as you can see there. The first category is classroom practice and students. The second one is school, community, and the third one we are going to talk about motivation or Cikgu Sam's personal undertakings, right? But I think for this section, it is advised for us to focus on category 2 and category 3, because I believe that just now is very extensive, the explanation for the classroom practice and students. So let us just focus on category 2 and 3, right? Okay, so how are we going to do this? We are going to do this by round. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to type out the question number, and okay, let's try it out first. Okay, we try it out first. Okay, so type now. Okay, I see the number that you already typed it in. All right, let's go to number 7 then. Let's see the question from number 7. Okay, Cikgu Sam, what do you think is the best way to gain parent support and involvement?
Right, this
What?
is a great
Yes.
question. I should have addressed it in my presentation just now, but yeah, fortunately. But good question, nonetheless.
But
So
it's
I
okay,
think
we still have this for the question, right?
right. So it's important that we need to have their leeway and to gain trust in my experience, sorry, gaining trust of the community was very crucial in what I was doing, because for the indigenous community, they they often see teachers or organizations that come in to help the community. They usually come in with a messiah complex. What is a messiah complex? A messiah complex is this: kita datang, kita nak buat sesuatu untuk diorang, dan kita buat sesuatu yang kita rasa yang bagus untuk mereka. Kita tak pernah nak involve mereka. So the first thing that I did was I started involving parents into my classroom. That was the first thing that I did. I know a lot of teachers might not want to do this, but that was the first thing that I did. I made sure that I've got nothing to hide. You want to come and observe me? Come, let's do this together. So initially they didn't want to come because the challenge in orang asli communities is it is always assumed that like I said, the perceptions just now kan, it is assumed yang dia orang tak nak terlibat, dia orang tak ada idea dan sebagainya. Tapi bagi saya kena cuba juga. I had to try. So I tried bringing them into the classroom slowly. When I wanted to do something else or I wanted to try something new, I made sure I engage with them. I give you the sekolah pokok, for example. When I wanted to go around the community and wanted to get the kids, I went to the houses. I asked them, is this something that you'll be interested in? How can I improve my program? So with that intention, that is very important. We need to be transparent with what we are doing. We need to tell them, hey, this is what I'm doing for your kids. How can I improve? How can I get the involvement? But of course, your challenge might be a bit different in urban areas and all that. But that's what I did. So I made myself very vulnerable. I was like, I've got nothing to hide. But this was important because we trusted each other. The community trusted me, I trusted the community, and at the end of the day, they trusted me with the kids. So that is very important. So the first thing you need to do is actively attempt to engage them. And how you do this, there's multiple ways of doing it. If you're in an urban area, write to them, send them messages, send them email, because without their support, whatever you do will lose its effectiveness. That is very true. Without the support of parents at home, without the support of what you're doing, it will lose its effectiveness. So you need to try.
Thank you for that, Cikgu Sam. I think that is very true, and the key point is to be transparent, right? Okay, so let's take a look at, all right, let's just focus on motivation category. That would see number 9 there.
Okay.
All right, okay. So first and foremost, congratulations, Cikgu Sam. Despite all the challenges coming our way as teachers, now how do you keep yourself motivated over and over again while dealing with the clerical workload in school? As I have understood that just now that you are actually the guru data for your school as well, right?
Yeah, I was the guru data, I was the guru asset, I was a few other things as well. So it was intense. I mean, I always prioritize the kids. Let me get this straight. In whatever that I was doing, the kids will come first. I didn't mind putting other things aside first. I have my priorities, but at the end of the day, it all comes to planning. And I believe, though it's going to sound very cliche, but if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You need to plan. You really need to plan your time. And when you do this consciously, because on top of that, I'm telling you about my reflections, the files, and everything that I was doing, I did not do it because somebody was asking me to do it. I did it because I knew it was important. So it becomes a culture, satu tabiat. Bila hari-hari you buat, you become very good and very efficient about it. But most importantly, I always focus on the kids first. So my focus is always my classroom lessons, the projects that I was doing with them, what I'm assessing them for, and I make sure I maximize the number of hours that I have in school focused on that. All the other things, I plan it at the other every hours. But I would say my best advice would be this: if you want to do it really well, you need to plan. But motivation is another factor altogether. Some people look for motivation at very different places, and everybody has got very different things going on at home, different family problems, different family commitments, and all that. But my motivation has always been my kids. I think I was involved with my students, not just as an English language teacher. I was a friend, I was a mentor, I was family, I was the part of the community as well. So I took it as a responsibility. Macam benda yang sesuatu yang you buat untuk anak you mana berkira kalau you buat untuk anak you kan? Tak ada berkira. So it's like that was the same. And that kept my motivation going. And even so, like right now I'm doing my master's, right? It's also motivated for the need to help my students. I've been in school for almost 10 years, and for a lot of teachers, lah lepas 8-9 tahun baru nak buat masters. Lambat. For other teachers, like 2 tahun quickly, because I wanted to see purpose in what I was doing. So I really focused on what I wanted to do. And my focus was the kids. And in order for me to focus on my kids, it came to a point where I realized that I needed to improve myself so that I can give better to my kids. That's when I started doing my masters. So that's my motivation. So find your motivation in what you're doing. Find your motivation in what you're doing. And for me, the best way that works was the kids. The more I focused upon them, the more I saw them grow, the more I saw them doing awesome in school as a learner, and then in their exams, it makes a lot of sense to keep on doing it.
All right, thank you for that. And I think that not only you, that actually all the teachers that we actually not actually the only subject teachers, but we are also wearing different hats in the school, having different responsibilities. And I think for me, it's important to find our own motivation, and our own motivation is not going to be same with others, right? Okay, now so let's go to number 12. Okay. Let's take a look at number 12. I'm sure there are times when you feel discouraged, that we feel not motivated, that we feel to, we want to give up. So how do you overcome that, Cikgu Sam, and where do you gather your strength from?
A lot of times, I tell you, like if I want to keep count of me.
How many times that you want to resign?
Yeah. And I would say that way, please. But I would say the thought has come to my mind a lot of times. But of what my purpose is, what I want to do, what I'm going to do later, what I'm doing currently with the students and all that. It is challenging because standing up for the right thing, believing in the right things, having principles, having opinions, being critical at times is not the best thing to do. The more critical you are, the more you ask questions, you get into trouble a lot. And I'm very much known for getting into trouble. But the thing, what I'm trying to say is this: how do I overcome that? Again, I have my focus. I know that I'm in this job and I'm in this profession not for the money. I know, and I'm in this profession not for what pangkat I would get and all that. I knew that my focus was very true. I wanted to give back to the kids. I wanted to give back to the community. So that was my focus. But it helps when you have, it really helps when you have good colleagues around you, when you have leaders, when you have a good support group around you. I initially did not have that. Let me be very honest with you. But in time, it started happening. But as leaders, as teachers, as colleagues, we all have a role to play to continually empower one another. Though this might sound cliche, but it's very important. Sometimes I feel, and I've seen it again and again, that bidang perguruan ni dah jadi macam satu pertandingan. Semua orang nak tunjuk saya lagi power daripada awak. Even my story of actually becoming, applying for the Global Teacher Prize, to be very honest with you, as humbly as I can put this, I never really wanted to apply in the first place. I thought that it is just, I did not do things for the awards. It was never my intention. But my mentor told me this: Sam, you apply for this award. The reason you're applying for this because it's going to give you the opportunity to do more things for your students, and at the same time, it's going to put what you have been fighting for the last 10 years about the kebenjadian of your orang asli kids, about how making learning meaningful to these kids makes them equal to everybody else in an international stage. That was the main reason why I joined in the first place. So gathering strength comes from people around you. So always surround yourself with positive people. And not just people who say yes to you all the time. You need to be surrounding yourself with critical people, people who can improve you. I think leaders also should start listening to your teachers as well. Teachers should also start listening to your leaders as well. If you all have the same focus in mind that you want to help the students, start listening more. And listening is always the hardest thing for everybody to do. Cakap senang, mendengar itu susah. You need to start listening.
All right, Cikgu Sam, thank you for that. And I think that we can squeeze in for one more question number. Let's take a look at school and community. What number we have in? All right. How about number 8?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Community involvement in rural area is seen as one of the important aspects to get the kids' interest in school. So, Cikgu Sam, what is your thoughts or opinions on this in urban setting?
Yeah, it's equally important, and I think I don't want to put this in a way that's going to offend anybody, but somehow the COVID-19 feels like a blessing. You know, suddenly parents realize, hey, it's not that easy. You know, it's not that easy, and teaching and learning or educating children is not solely the responsible of the school anymore. You know, it's not about I hantar my kids to school, dia belajar, dia balik, dia pandai, dia ambil. So it's not that anymore. So I think what COVID-19 has shown that we have more, everybody has an important role to play, and we need to be actively. So yes, my opinions on urban setting, yes, we need to, it's even more important to get them involved. But let me tell you this, probably in an urban setting, the challenges will be, you would have parents who have their own views. You would have parents who think differently. So you always have to view things as this. You are a professional. You, as teachers, you are a professional. So you need to constantly equip yourselves to answer them, to give them the evidence of what you're making your decisions about. It's not that you agak-agak saja rasa benda ni akan berkesan untuk murid you, jadi you buat. Bukan. Show them. This is proof. This is evidence. I'm doing this based on informed practice, based on data that I've been collecting, based on data and research as well. So you need to have this kind of an engagement with them to show them you know what you're doing as well. So it's both ways. It's both ways. I'm not saying, because some people might say that, oh, Sam, listening means I'm just going to listen and follow what they do. That's not necessarily true. It needs to be an active process of giving and taking. Yeah. I don't mind answering a few more questions if you have the time, actually. So.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that, Cikgu Sam. But I think that we're going to save some 5 minutes for the live Q&A session.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yes, we do have that.
Okay,
all right.
okay.
So let me just browse through the comment section then.
Sure.
Okay. All right. This is from Fatih Ryan. Cikgu Samuel, what are the things or challenges teachers face online, all right, that the public do not know and that we wish that the public would know?
Oh, this is a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
I mean, if we want to wish, but like I said earlier, you know, the COVID-19 has taught them that it's not as easy to teach their kids. So probably on a personal matter, this is just a personal opinion. I'm not really sure whether this is supported by any evidence or
Sure.
true or not. But I think the public should know that they have a role to play as well. They have a role to play in educating their kids as well. And we are also realizing that there's no one solution. For example, when we come up, that's why the PDPR guidelines came out by the Ministry of Education. A lot of people didn't understand it, because the key element or the fundamental element of the guideline was this: sekolah ataupun guru boleh mengadaptasikan mengikut keperluan sekolah dan murid masing-masing. That is the key element of the whole thing. So we need to do this. We need to be able to show that we can make the right decisions. But of course, unfortunately, our job, being in the public eye, we are going to get criticism all the time, you know. And what I would like to advise you is, don't focus on it. What you can do is you need to equip yourselves, improve yourself, upskill yourself, make sure that you know what you're doing and what you're doing is the right thing according to evidences that you have collected, according to different perspectives, and then you go on with it. You know, because if you're often looking at what other people might say, they are not experts. Easier said. I think recently there was a call for people to get in other individuals to come and teach online, blah, 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 actors and all that. I disagree completely because we are experts in assessment, we are experts in curriculum, we are experts in pedagogical design, we are expert in so many other different areas as well. So we need to show that. But don't go online lah and say like, hey, you guys
Yeah.
would. I would discourage you from doing that. But the most importantly is equip yourselves, and hopefully it's going to be hard because these are cultural and societal expectations that they expect everything to be great and they will always look for things to criticize. But the best thing you can do is equip yourselves at all times.
Yes, to keep yourself, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have more time? No. All right. Oh, okay. So thank you, Cikgu Sam, for that. And I think that's the only question for Q&A session, as we are coming to an end, actually. And teachers, thank you for all the questions. Thank you, viewers, for engaging in this table topic activity. So, Cikgu Sam, do you have any more words of encouragement or advice for all the teachers out there for
Well,
us
yeah,
to trying their best for our kids?
I basically wrote something down. Let me see if I can
Yeah.
find it. All right. First of all, I'd like to encourage you to be brave
Yes.
and don't be complacent. A lot of times, I think we just become very complacent with whatever we're doing. We come up with a notion of what works and we keep on doing it for years and years. And oh, saya dah buat macam ni dah 15 tahun dah. Saya dah buat macam ni dah 20 tahun dah.
That we're not, we don't listen and we are not going to change, right?
Yes, exactly. So never be complacent. Times are changing, needs are changing, students are changing, expectations are completely different. So always strive to improve and always be critical of your practice. That is very important. I'm the biggest critic of what I do. I always look at how I can improve stuff. And lastly, this session is called Be Inspired, right? Don't be inspired by Samuel alone. Trust me, be inspired by your students. That will be the best place to look for inspiration. They are the best source of inspiration. Trust me. I always say this. They are the ones who changed my life. They are the ones who changed my perceptions towards education and my principles towards what I'm doing. Not necessarily towards indigenous education alone, but overall. So look to your students for inspiration. Get to know them. Build relationships with them. And I assure you, great things are bound to happen.
Yeah. And thanks again, Cikgu Sam. Indeed, a lot of things that we have got right now from you. And thank you for agreeing to this session. So I wish you the best of luck of your future undertakings.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, my viewers, I have few announcements regarding the SPL KPM. All right. So attention to all viewers, teachers especially. It seems that the SPL KPM website is down for a moment. So I repeat that the SPL KPM website is down for a moment, but not to worry. If you look at the slides there, we already given you the QR code for the Google form that we already created. Okay, now so you can actually scan the code, or if you look at your in the comment section, that we're already giving you the link for the Google form. So what you have to do is to fill in your details, your IC number, your contact number, and your school name. Let me repeat that. Please fill in your IC number, your school name, and your contact number. Because this is through Google form, it's not from the SPL KPM. So what we're going to do is our team will help you to fill in the SPL KPM credit manually. We are going to do that manually. So let me remind you to fill in your IC number correctly. All right. So we are going to fill in manually. Once the SPL KPM link is okay again, then we're going to do that. So thank you for that. So I was again, thank you to Cikgu Sam for agreeing to do this session with us, and also the working community for this webinar. Special thanks to Cikgu Lim Mejin and also my Cikgu Muhammad Khalid and the English panel of SMK Tun Fatimah Hashim. These are the person behind the curtain, behind the scene, who make sure that this webinar will run smoothly. So again, thank you, my dearest colleagues. And also special thanks to our principal, Cikgu S. Mugunan anak lelaki Chandu for his guidance and his continuous support that he has given for us to run this webinar. And so Sir Mugunan, you can consider this as our retirement present for you. Happy retirement day in advance, right? Okay, special credit to PPD Pasir Gudang, our SISC Plus Bahasa, Puan Zaitun bin Tingah, and also the ICT department, Encik Lokman Hakim bin Muhammad, for the ICT support that they already given us. And also, last but not least, the viewers who are who tuning in this webinar from 2 p.m. until now. Thank you for being good sport, and may this webinar inspire and motivate us to do more above and beyond for our students. And also may many webinars such as this can continue to be the reference point and contributing ideas by the teachers for the teachers. Now, I hope that you have a very good day for the rest of this evening, and stay safe, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bye-bye.